You think you know silence? Real silence isn't quiet. It screams. It's the sound of a telephone that hasn't rung in 62 years. It's the dust settling on a cardboard box marked evidence that nobody has opened since Kennedy was president. And right now, that silence is about to break. Because the little girl inside that box ... She just got her name back. And she has a hell of a story to tell. They found her in a field of bluebonnets off a dust-choked road in Williamson County. 1963. Just a kid. 7 years old, maybe 8. No shoes. No ID. No missing persons report, matching her description within 500 miles. For 6 decades, she was just Jane Doe. A ghost story locals told their kids to keep them from wandering too far. Police departments burned through 3 generations of detectives trying to solve it. My own father was the first one on the scene. He died without knowing who she was. I'm Mark Miller. I've spent 40 years carrying a badge, and 20 of them were spent staring at her postmortem photo, wondering who wakes up one morning and forgets a 7-year-old girl. We used to think monsters hid under the bed. We were wrong. They drive sedans, they pay taxes, and sometimes they're the ones who tuck you in at night. Today, thanks to a spit of DNA and a genealogy website, we finally know who she is. But knowing her name was just the beginning. The truth? The truth is darker than any of us, even me, could have imagined. The Texas heat does something to your memory. It warps it, like heat waves rising off the asphalt on Highway 29. It blurs the edges of the past until you can't tell what happened from what you feared happened. But I remember the day my dad came home from that scene. I was 10. He walked through the screen door, took off his hat, and didn't say a word to Mom. He just went to the sink and washed his hands, scrubbed them, like he was trying to peel the skin off. That was the first time I felt the weight of the unsolved. It took me another 30 years to inherit that weight officially. By the time I made detective in '95, the Bluebonnet Doe case was already folklore. The file was thin, embarrassingly thin. A few black and white photos of a crime scene trampled by deputies who didn't know better back then. A sketch that looked like every little girl you've ever seen, and none of them at the same time. And the physical evidence. God, it was pathetic. A faded red ribbon. A single white sock. And the pollen samples from her clothes that said she hadn't died where they found her. She'd been moved. Like furniture. I kept her file on the corner of my desk. It was my someday pile. You know the one. Every cop has it. The cases you promise yourself you'll crack when the radio stops squawking about domestic disputes and armed robberies. But the radio never stops. And someday turned into retirement. Last year, I got a call. It wasn't from the station. It was from a lab in the woodlands. Othram. These guys are the new wizards. They don't look for fingerprints. They look for ghosts in a double helix. Detective Miller? The voice on the other end said, "We think we found a cousin. A cousin. Third cousin, twice removed, actually. Someone who had uploaded their DNA to Ancestry.com to find out if they were more Irish or German. And instead, they unknowingly handed us the key to a 60-year-old vault. I drove down there the next morning. The lab looked more like a tech startup than a police station. Glass walls, espresso machines, kids in hoodies staring at monitors. It felt wrong somehow. Solving a murder used to mean pavement pounding, cigarette smoke, and intimidation. Now it was algorithms and probability clouds. But when the lead geneticist, a sharp woman named Dr. Reese, turned her screen toward me, the old instincts kicked in. Here, she pointed to a cluster of nodes on a digital tree. This is your Jane Doe. We've been building her tree backward from the cousin. It's messy. Lots of undocumented births, people moving between counties without records. But we've narrowed it down to 2 families in Travis County. 2 families. 62 years of silence, and suddenly the world shrank to 2 households. I spent the next week doing what I do best, digging. Not in the dirt, but in paper. Dusty, crumbling paper in the basement of the county clerk's office. Birth certificates from the late 50s are a nightmare. Handwriting you can't read, fathers listed as unknown, misspellings that become legal names. But I found a match. A girl born in 1956, Mary Elizabeth Vance. The name hit me hard. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was a person. Mary Elizabeth. She wasn't Jane Doe. She wasn't the body. She was Mary. I needed confirmation. The DNA from the cousin was good, but for a court or just for my own sanity, I needed a direct link. Dr. Aris suggested we try to find a sibling. According to the family tree we constructed, Mary might have had a younger brother. If he was still alive, he'd be in his late 60s. Finding him wasn't hard. People leave trails, even when they don't want to. A credit check, a property tax record, and there he was. David Vance, living in a double-wide outside of Llano, about an hour from where his sister was found. I didn't call first. You don't call on a cold knock like this. You need to see their eyes before they have time to put up the walls. The drive to Llano was quiet. The Texas hill country is beautiful in a brutal kind of way. Limestone and cedar, dry creeks, and hard ground. I kept thinking about a 7-year-old girl out here alone. Or worse, not alone. David Vance's place was at the end of a gravel driveway. An old truck on blocks. A porch sagging under the weight of years and neglect. A dog barked a half-blind heeler that looked as tired as the house. I stepped out of my car, badge on my belt, though I wasn't sure how much authority it carried anymore. I was just an old man bothering another old man. David came to the screen door. He was thin, with skin like leather and eyes that had seen too much sun and not enough kindness. He held a can of beer, even though it was barely noon. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice like grinding stones. "Mr. Vance, my name is Mark Miller. I'm looking into an old case, a very old case. He didn't move, didn't invite me in. I paid my tickets, officer. It's not about tickets, David. It's about your sister." That was the moment. The split second where the mask slips, I saw it. A flicker. Not surprise. Not confusion. It was recognition. And then, instantly, fear. "I don't have a sister," he said. He started to close the door. I put my hand on the frame. "Mary Elizabeth," I said. "Born 1956. Disappeared 1963. We found her, David." He froze. The beer can crunched in his hand. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a 6-year-old boy looking out from those old eyes. A scared little boy. "You found her?" he whispered. "After all this time? We found her. And now I need to know who took her." He opened the door then, stepped back into the shadows of his living room. It smelled of stale smoke and old frying grease. "You better come in," he said. "But you ain't gonna like what I have to say." Nobody ever did. I sat on a couch covered in a plaid blanket. David sat in a recliner opposite me. He stared at the floor for a long time. "She didn't just disappear," he finally said. "That's what Mama told the neighbors. That's what she told the sheriff when he finally came around asking about school truancy. Side Mary went to live with an aunt in Oklahoma. But we didn't have an aunt in Oklahoma." "What happened, David?" I asked softly. "This is the hold part of the interrogation. Don't push. Just let the silence do the work." "It was the summer of '63, he began. "Hotter than hell. Daddy was a mean drunk, not the sloppy kind. The quiet kind. The kind that smiled before he hit you. I pulled out my notepad, but I didn't write. I just watched him. Mary was his favorite target," David said, his voice trembling. "Because she looked like Mama, and he hated Mama for reasons I never understood. That night, I woke up to a sound. A thud, like a sack of feed hitting the floorboards. Then silence. He looked up at me, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. I peeked out my bedroom door. I saw him carrying her. She was wrapped in a quilt, the wedding ring quilt Mama made. He walked right past me. He saw me, detective. He looked me right in the eye. And what did he say? David shuddered. He said, "Go back to sleep, boy, or you're next." So I did. I went back to bed, and I pulled the covers over my head, and I prayed to God to make me deaf and blind. In the morning, she was gone. And the quilt was gone. Did your mother ask? Mama had a black eye that morning. She didn't ask nothing. We just went on, like Mary never existed. It was a classic story, sadly. Domestic violence, fear, silence. But something felt off. My gut, honed by decades of listening to liars and truth-tellers, was twitching. It was too neat, too rehearsed. "David," I said, "we found her wrapped in a blanket, yes, but it wasn't a quilt. It was a canvas tarp, and she wasn't just dropped. She was buried, carefully, with a toy." David's head snapped up. "A toy? A little wooden horse, hand-carved, crude. Did your father carve?" David's face went pale, paler than before. "No," he whispered, "Daddy didn't carve. He didn't have the patience." "Then who did?" He stared at me, and the fear in his eyes shifted. It wasn't fear of his dead father anymore. It was fear of something else, something closer. I used to carve," he said. "I made that horse for her birthday. So if your father took her in the middle of the night, wrapped in a quilt," I leaned forward, "how did your carving end up in the grave with her, wrapped in a tarp?" The silence in the room grew heavy. The air conditioning unit rattled in the window, a rhythmic chugging that sounded like a dying heart. "You're lying to me, David," I said. "Not angry, just factual. Your story about your dad. It's what you've told yourself for 60 years to survive. But science doesn't lie, and neither does that wooden horse." He started to shake. "I didn't kill her," he sobbed. "I swear to God, I didn't hurt her." "Then tell me the truth." "It wasn't Daddy," he choked out. "Daddy was gone that week, working the oil fields in Odessa. It was the man." "What man?" "The man in the white suit," David whispered. "He came to the house. He said he was a doctor, said Mary was sick, said he had to take her to the hospital." I froze. "A doctor? In a white suit? In rural Texas in 1963? "David," I said slowly, "did this man have a name?" "He gave Mama a card," David said. "I kept it. For a long time, I kept it. I thought maybe one day I'd go find him and bring Mary back." "Do you still have it?" He nodded. He got up on shaky legs and went to a drawer in a towering wooden hutch. He rummaged around under piles of old bills and coupons. He pulled out a small, yellowed rectangle of cardstock. He handed it to me. I looked at it. The ink was faded, but legible. Dr. T.H. Holloway, Clinical Research, Depth of Psychology. And below that, a symbol, not a medical cross. It was a triangle with an eye in the center, but not the Masonic one. This one had 3 lines radiating from the pupil. I felt a chill go down my spine that had nothing to do with the AC. I knew that symbol. I'd seen it before. Not in a police file, but in my father's personal journals. The ones he kept locked in a safe. The ones I hadn't opened since he died. My dad hadn't just been a cop. He'd been investigating something else. Something he called the Project. "David," I said, my voice tight, "did your mother? Did she ever talk about special abilities?" David looked at me, confused. "How did you know?" "Mama used to say Mary was touched. Said she knew when it was going to rain before the clouds showed up. Said she could find lost things just by thinking about them." I stood up. The room felt suddenly very small. This wasn't just a domestic murder. This wasn't just a cold case. We had stumbled onto something that had been buried for a reason. "Get your shoes, David," I said. "Where are we going?" "We're going to find out who Dr. Holloway is. And we're going to find out why a 7-year-old girl was buried with a tracker in her femur." What? The autopsy report? I lied. "We found metal in the bone." I didn't know what it was until just now. It wasn't shrapnel. It was a tag. I walked out to the porch, the card burning a hole in my hand. I looked out at the Texas horizon, vast and empty. But it wasn't empty. It was hiding things. I pulled out my phone and dialed the lab. "Dr. Aris," I said when she picked up, "don't go home. And lock the doors." "Detective, what's wrong?" "That DNA sample," I said. "Run it again. But this time, don't look for family matches. Look for markers. Artificial markers." I don't understand." "Just do it." "And Aris? If anyone asks, we haven't found anything yet." I hung up. David was standing in the doorway, clutching his shoes. "You think the man in the white suit killed her?" he asked. "I don't think he just killed her, David," I said, staring at the symbol on the card. "I think he was studying her." The drive from Llano to San Antonio is usually a scenic tour of Texas limestone and twisted mesquite, but with David Vance shivering in the passenger seat, it felt more like a funeral procession. He sat there clutching that yellowed card like it was a rosary, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few minutes. Paranoia is contagious, and by the time we hit the city limits, I found myself checking my mirrors too, half expecting to see a black sedan trailing my beat-up Ford. We weren't looking for a person anymore. We were looking for a ghost, because according to every public record, I'd pulled up on my phone while David pumped gas. Dr. T.H. Holloway had been dead since 1974, died in a single-car accident on a clear night. No witnesses. Convenient. But dead men don't leave trackers in little girls' bones. And they certainly don't run psychology departments that don't officially exist. The address on the card led us to an old medical building on the outskirts of the medical center district, a brutalist concrete block that looked like it had been designed to withstand a siege rather than welcome patients. It was mostly abandoned now, waiting for a demolition crew that was apparently years behind schedule. The windows were boarded up with plywood that had grayed with age, and the parking lot was a cracked landscape of weeds and broken glass. "This is it?" David asked, his voice barely a whisper, staring up at the looming structure. "This is where he worked?" I nodded, killing the engine. "According to the card. Stay close, David, and if you see anything at all, you tell me." We bypassed the chained front doors and found a service entrance around the back that had been pried open, likely by squatters or copper thieves. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of mold, wet drywall, and the unmistakable copper tang of old rust. We moved through the dark hallways, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dust motes, dancing in the stagnant air. It was a maze of empty rooms, stripped of furniture, wires hanging from the ceiling like dead vines. We found the directory near the elevators, the plastic cover yellow and cracked. Most of the names had peeled off, but there, on the 4th floor, faint but readable, Suite 404, Clinical Research. The elevator was dead, so we took the stairs, our footsteps echoing too loudly in the concrete stairwell. David was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from a panic that seemed to be rising in him like floodwater. "I remember," he wheezed as we reached the 4th landing. "I remember the smell. It smelled like ... peppermint and iodine." I stopped, shining the light on his face. "You were here? You said he came to your house." David shook his head, eyes wide and unseeing. "No, I didn't think I was. But now, the smell, it's bringing it back. Maybe I came with them? Maybe I waited in the car? Memory is a tricky thing. Trauma fragments it, hides the pieces in the dark corners of your mind until a smell or a sound drags them out. Suite 404 was at the end of a long corridor, the only door that was still intact. It was heavy oak, oddly out of place in this sterile industrial building. I tried the handle locked. Of course, I took a step back and kicked it, right next to the latch. The wood splintered with a dry crack, and the door swung inward. The room beyond wasn't empty. It was a time capsule. Dust lay thick on everything, on the heavy mahogany desk, on the leather chairs that had cracked and split, on the rows of metal filing cabinets lining the walls. But it wasn't the furniture that stopped me cold. It was the walls. They were covered in charts. Hand-drawn charts, complex and chaotic, connecting names, dates, and locations with thick black lines. And in the center of the largest chart, circled in red ink that had faded to a rusty brown, was a name, Mary Elizabeth Vance. Next to it was a date, July 14th, 1963, and below that, a single word, initiated. He knew her, David whispered, walking slowly toward the wall. He knew all of them. I followed his gaze. There were other names. Dozens of them. Billy, Sarah, Michael. Most had dates from the late 50s and early 60s. Some had terminated, written next to them. Others, like Mary, said initiated. And a few, just a handful, said transferred. I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos, documenting everything. This wasn't just a murderer's trophy room. This was a ledger. David, I said, keeping my voice steady, look at these names. Do you recognize any of them? Maybe kids from school? From the neighborhood? David squinted at the wall, his finger tracing a line from Mary's name to another. Billy Miller. He lived 2 farms over. He drowned in the creek the same summer Mary left. They said it was an accident. He moved to another name, Sarah Jenkins. She got sick. Polio, they said. But she was walking fine the week before. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. These weren't just random victims. This was a harvest. Start looking through the cabinets, I ordered, holstering my phone. We need files. We need to know what initiated means. We tore through the cabinets. Most were empty, their contents likely shredded or burned decades ago. But in the bottom drawer of the last cabinet, stuck behind the sliding mechanism, I found a thick manila envelope. It wasn't labeled with a name. It just had that symbol on it, the triangle with the eye. I pulled it out, the paper brittle in my hands. Inside wasn't a patient file. It was a proposal. Project Aletheia, Phase 2, cognitive expansion in prepubescent subjects via auditory stimulation. I skimmed the pages, the technical jargon chilling in its detachment. It spoke of frequencies, subliminal messaging, and induced hallucinations. It talked about unlocking dormant potential in children through trauma and sound. And then, on page 12, I saw it. A diagram of a small cylindrical device. The caption read, Subdermal Tracking and Biotelemetry Unit. Implant site, femur. The tracker, I muttered. It wasn't just for tracking location. It was monitoring them. Heart rate, adrenaline, brain waves. Detective. David's voice cracked. He was standing by the desk, holding a small, rectangular object. It was a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind you see in old movies. A tape was threaded through it. It was in the desk, he said. It says Session 1 Vance. I looked at the machine, then at the power cord lying on the floor. There was an outlet nearby. I plugged it in. The machine hummed to life, a low electric buzz that sounded too loud in the quiet room. I pressed play, static, then a click. A man's voice, smooth, calm, clinical. July 14th, 1963. Subject, Mary Elizabeth Vance. Age, 7. Initial assessment, A pause. Then a small, trembling voice. I want my mommy. Your mother knows you're here, Mary. She wants you to be special. Don't you want to be special? I want to go home. You are home, Mary. This is where you belong now. Now, put on the headphones. I want you to listen to the sounds. Tell me what you see. A high-pitched whine started on the tape, rising in pitch until it was almost painful. Beneath it, a rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat. Make it stop. Mary screamed. It hurts. My head hurts. Focus, Mary. Look past the pain. What do you see? The man, she shrieked. I see the man in the wall. He has no face. I slammed the stop button. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. David was on his knees, hands over his ears, sobbing. I remember that sound, he wailed. I heard it. In the house, before they took her. It came from the radio. Even when it was off, I grabbed the tape, shoving it into my pocket. We're leaving, I said, pulling David up. We have enough. But as we turned to the door, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Not from the tape. From the hallway. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps on the concrete. David, I hissed, pushing him behind the heavy desk. Quiet. I drew my service weapon, a .38 special I hadn't fired in 5 years. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I held my breath, aiming at the open doorway. A shadow stretched across the floorboards, long and distorted. Detective Miller, a voice called out. It wasn't the smooth voice from the tape. It was rougher, younger, but with an edge of authority that I recognized. You're trespassing on private property, and you're holding stolen goods. A man stepped into the light. He was wearing a suit, but it wasn't white. It was charcoal gray, expensive, tailored. He looked to be in his late 40s, with a face that was completely forgettable, the kind of face you see in a crowd and instantly erase, except for his eyes. They were cold, dead, and entirely too calm for a man facing a gun. Who are you? I demanded, keeping the sights leveled on his chest. I'm the cleanup crew, he said, smiling without showing his teeth. Dr. Holloway left a mess. We've been tidying up for 50 years. And you, detective, just kicked over the dustpan. This ends now, I said. We know about the project. We know about the children. The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You know nothing. You found a crumb and think you've discovered the bakery. Project Aletheia wasn't about torture, detective. It was about evolution. And Mary, she was our greatest success. Before she expired. Success? They buried her in a field like trash. She was 7 years old, I shouted. She died of exposure. Did she? The man took a step forward. Or did she transcend? The device in her leg. It didn't stop transmitting when her heart stopped, detective. It kept sending data for 3 days after she was clinically dead. Brain activity. Complex patterns. She wasn't dead. She was ... elsewhere. He raised a hand, and I saw the glint of metal. Not a gun, a small remote. And now, I'm afraid I have to initiate a new session. He pressed the button. A high-pitched whine filled the room. The same whine from the tape. It wasn't coming from the recorder. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the air itself seemed to vibrate. David screamed and collapsed, clutching his head. My vision blurred. The gun felt heavy, impossible to lift. The room started to spin, the charts on the wall swirling into a vortex of black lines. What ... what is this? I gasped, falling to my knees. The man in the gray suit stood over me, the sound washing over him like he was immune. Frequency 440. He said calmly. It induces paralysis and suggestive states. Don't fight it, detective. Just tell me ... what do you see? Darkness clawed at the edges of my vision. But through the haze, I saw something. The chart on the wall, The one with Mary's name seemed to glow. And for a split second, before the blackness took me, I saw the black lines on the paper move. They weren't lines. They were snakes. And in the center, where Mary's name had been, a face appeared. A face with no features, just smooth, pale skin. The man in the wall. Waking up didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, painful crawl out of a deep black well, with every inch of progress punished by a splitting headache that felt like a railroad spike being driven through my temples. The first thing I noticed was the light, not the harsh, yellow sun of the Texas afternoon, but a sterile, humming fluorescent white that burned even through my closed eyelids. The second thing was the smell. Antiseptic, ozone, and something metallic, like the taste of blood in your mouth after a punch. I tried to raise my hand to shield my eyes, but my wrist hit resistance immediately. Leather straps. Heavy, cold, and tight. I forced my eyes open, blinking against the glare, and realized I was strapped to a chair. A heavy, bolted-down medical chair in a room that had no corners. Literally. The walls curved into the ceiling and floor in a seamless white sphere, leaving the eye with nowhere to rest, no shadows to hide in. It was a sensory deprivation tank without the water, designed to make you lose your sense of up, down, and self. And sitting across from me on a simple metal stool was the man in the gray suit. He was reading my father's leather-bound journal. "The human mind is a fascinating receiver, Detective," he said, not looking up from the yellowed pages. "It's constantly tuning out noise. Background static, the hum of electricity, the rotation of the earth. If we heard everything, we'd go mad in seconds." Dr. Holloway's theory was simple. What if the most important signals are the ones our brain automatically filters out? What if we engineered a way to lower those filters? He closed the book with a soft thud that echoed weirdly in the spherical room. Your father understood this. He was a man of vision, unlike his son, who seems content with stumbling around in the dark. I tugged at the restraints, testing the give. There was none. "Where is David?" I croaked, my throat feeling like I'd swallowed sand. "David is undergoing a recalibration," the man said smoothly. "He's been out of the loop for a long time. His frequency drift was significant. We're just tuning him back in. But you ... you're a new variable. And frankly, I'm surprised. Most people your age stroke out when exposed to the 440 Hz wave at that amplitude. But you saw the pattern. You saw the snakes. I saw a hallucination induced by a sonic weapon." I spat back, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "You drugged us with sound. It's a parlor trick. High-tech brainwashing for a cult that should have died in the 60s. The man smiled, that same thin, bloodless smile from the office. "Mr. Graves? You can call me Mr. Graves. And it's not a hallucination, Mark. May I call you Mark? It's a rendering. Think of your brain as a computer monitor. The frequency we broadcast doesn't create the image. It just adjusts the vertical hold so you can finally see the picture that's always been there. That man in the wall you saw? He's in this room right now. He's standing right behind me. You just can't see him because your brain is frantically scrubbing him out to protect your sanity." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "But Mary didn't scrub him out. She invited him in. Mary was murdered," I growled, straining against the leather until my wrists burned. "She was a 7-year-old girl you buried in a field because your experiment failed." Graves laughed softly, shaking his head as if explaining simple math to a toddler. "Failed? Oh, Mark, Mary was the bridge. When she died, or rather, when her biological vessel ceased function, the implant recorded a data stream that lasted for 72 hours. Do you know how much information the human brain can process after death? Theoretically, 0. But Mary transmitted terabytes of complex geometric data. She wasn't dead. She WA's untethered. She was exploring the other side of the wall. We buried the shell, yes. But the signal? We've been listening to it for 60 years. It's how we developed the technology that built this facility. It's how we influence elections, markets, decisions. A little nudge here, a little whisper there. All thanks to a little girl in bluebonnets. My father, I said, the realization hitting me harder than the headache. Why do you have his journal? He was investigating you. Graves stood up and walked over to me, placing the book gently on my lap. Open it. Page 42. November 1962. I looked down. My hands were tied, but I could see the page. It was my dad's handwriting, sharp, angular script. Funding secured for Phase 2. Holloway promises results by summer. If we can weaponize the intuition observed in the test subjects, the Cold War is over. We won't need spies. We'll have seers. The air left my lungs. My father wasn't the hero cop trying to stop the mad scientist. He was the handler. He was the one who authorized the money. He got cold feet at the end, Graves said, circling behind me. When the children started ... changing, when the mortality rate spiked. He tried to shut it down, bury the evidence. That's why he took the files home. That's why he never solved the case. He was the case, Mark. You've been trying to solve your own father's crime. Rage is a useful thing. It burns out fear. It sharpens the senses. I stopped listening to Graves's philosophy and started looking at the room. The spherical wall wasn't seamless. There was a hairline fracture in the curve near the flora panel. And Graves, in his arrogance, had left a pen in his jacket pocket, a metal pen. He was standing right behind me now, leaning close to my ear. We need to know what you saw in the office, Mark. The snake pattern. Did it move clockwise or counterclockwise? This is vital. I let my head loll forward, feigning exhaustion. It ... it moved left, I whispered. Graves leaned in closer. Left? Are you sure? That contradicts the previous models. He moved to the front again, crouching down to look at my face. That was his mistake. He was within range. I didn't have my hands, but I had my legs. I snapped my head up and launched a double-footed kick straight into his chest. It wasn't a kung fu movie move. It was a desperate, piston-like thrust fueled by old man strength and adrenaline. Graves flew backward, the air exploding out of him with a wet wheeze. He hit the curved wall and slid down, gasping. I didn't wait. I threw my weight to the right, tipping the heavy chair over. It crashed to the floor with a deafening boom, jarring my shoulder, but it put me on ground level. I shimmied, dragging the chair like a snail shell toward Graves. He was fumbling for his remote, the device that controlled the sound. I couldn't let him touch it. I threw my body weight forward, slamming the metal headrest of the chair onto his hand. Bones crunched. He screamed a high, thin sound that was satisfyingly human. "The keys!" I roared, pressing the chair frame down on his shattered hand. "Unlock me, or I swear to God I will break every bone in your wrist." Graves, pale and sweating, reached into his pocket with his good hand and tossed a ring of magnetic keys across the floor. I had to maneuver the chair awkwardly to reach them, contorting my fingers to grab the fob. It took 10 seconds where I expected security to burst in, but I got it. I swiped the fob over the wrist locks. Click, click. The straps fell away. I scrambled out of the chair, my muscles screaming, and grabbed Graves by the lapels, hauling him up. "Where is David?" I shouted, slamming him against the white wall. "Sector 4, he wheezed, clutching his broken hand. "Observation deck." "But you're too late, Miller. The session has already started." I knocked him out with a short right hook to the temple. He crumpled. I took his key card, the remote, and his gun, a sleek polymer pistol that looked like something from a sci-fi flick. I didn't know where I was, but I knew I was underground. The air pressure was heavy, pressing on my eardrums. I hit the panel release I'd spotted earlier. The wall hissed open, revealing a long concrete corridor lit by red emergency strips. I ran. I ran like I hadn't run in 20 years, ignoring the protesting ache in my knees and the fire in my lungs. The signs on the wall were cryptic. Sector 1, retention. Sector 2, archives. Sector 4, auditory testing. I burst through the double doors of Sector 4 and skidded to a halt. It wasn't a room. It was a theater. A glass observation deck overlooked a massive circular chamber below, and in the center of that chamber, strapped to a chair just like mine, was David Vance. But he wasn't screaming. He wasn't fighting. Giant speakers, arranged in a ring around him, were pulsing. I couldn't hear the sound through the glass, but I could feel it a vibration in the floor that rattled my teeth. And David, David was glowing. Not literally, but his veins, the veins in his neck and face, were standing out, black and throbbing, pulsing in time with the speakers. I raised the gun and shot the glass. It was reinforced, bulletproof. The round just starred the surface. Damn it. I looked at the control console in front of me. It was a mess of dials and screens, all displaying waveforms that looked like jagged mountains. I didn't know how to stop it, but I knew how to break things. I started smashing the console with the butt of the gun, shattering screens, ripping out wires. Sparks showered down, stinging my hands. Below, the speakers popped and whined, the rhythm breaking. The vibration stopped. David slumped forward in the chair below. I found the door to the lower level and took the stairs 3 at a time. When I reached him, the smell of ozone was overpowering. "David!" I yelled, fumbling with his restraints. "David, wake up!" I got one strap loose, then the other. He fell into my arms, dead weight, but he was breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths. "We have to go," I grunted, hoisting him up. He was light, frail, like a bag of bird bones. I dragged him toward the exit, half carrying him. Detective ... T whispered. His voice didn't sound like David anymore. It sounded ... hollow, multiplied. Detective ... I saw her. I paused, propping him against the wall near the exit. "You saw Mary?" He looked up at me. His eyes were blown wide, the pupils swallowing the irises entirely. They were black voids. "No," he said, "not Mary. I saw where she went. It's a city, detective. A city made of sound. And they're all there. All the missing kids. They're building it." He grabbed my jacket, his grip surprisingly strong. "And they know you're here. The man in the wall. He says hello." A siren began to wail a traditional, loud, mechanical klaxon. Red lights started flashing. We had maybe 2 minutes before a tactical team turned us into Swiss cheese. "Save the ghost stories for the car," I said, shouldering his weight again. "Right now, we need to get back to the surface before we become permanent residents." We stumbled out into the corridor, but as we turned the corner toward the elevators, I saw them. At the far end of the hall, 3 figures. They weren't security guards. They were children. Or they looked like children. They wore hospital gowns, and they were standing perfectly still, holding hands, blocking her path. They didn't have faces. Just smooth, pale skin where eyes and mouths should be. And in my head, bypassing my ears entirely, I heard a voice, 1,000 voices speaking as one. The thing about children is that they are supposed to be noisy. They stomp, they giggle, they cry. But the 3 figures blocking the hallway stood with a stillness that was unnatural, like statues carved from ice. And the voice in my head, that choral, genderless whisper, wasn't asking for candy. "You can't take him, Mark." It echoed inside my skull, rattling against the back of my eyes. David, slumped against my shoulder, let out a whimper. "They're the ones," he mumbled. his head lolling. The ones who didn't come back. I tightened my grip on his belt, hoisting him higher. We're leaving, David. Don't look at them. I raised the gun, the polymer grip slick with sweat. Move, I shouted, my actual voice sounding small and tinny compared to the telepathic boom in my head. I said move. The figures didn't flinch. Instead, the one in the center, a girl, judging by the height, though the hospital gown hung loose and shapeless, raised a hand. It wasn't a threat. It was a beckoning. Join us, Mark. The frequency is beautiful here. No pain, no memory. Just the hum. The air in the corridor began to ripple, distorted by heat waves that weren't there. My ears popped. The high-pitched whine from the chamber was leaking out. Or maybe they were generating it themselves. Not today, I gritted out. I aimed not at them, but at the fire suppression pipe running along the ceiling above their heads. It was a desperate, stupid gamble, but shooting ghost kids didn't seem like a winning strategy. I pulled the trigger. The gun had no recoil, just a sharp thwip of compressed air or energy. The pipe exploded. A curtain of chemical foam and high-pressure water blasted downward, hitting the floor with the force of a waterfall. The figures didn't scream, but the connection broke. The voice in my head snapped off like a radio cord being yanked from the wall. The visual distortion vanished. They were just kids again, confused, wet, stumbling back into the mist. Go, go. I dragged David through the spray, slipping on the wet concrete. We crashed through the double doors at the end of the hall and spilled into a stairwell. Up, we had to go up. My knees screamed with every step, burning with the lactic acid of 64 years and a lifetime of bad decisions. David was dead weight, his feet dragging, mumbling nonsense about the geometry of sorrow. We hit the first landing, then the second. At the third floor, a door burst open above us. Boots on metal. Flashlight beams cutting the gloom. Sector 4 breach. Containment team to north stairwell. Plan B, I wheezed, looking at the heavy steel door on our landing. It was marked maintenance. I kicked it open. We stumbled into a maze of pipes and humming generators. It was hot, smelling of oil and ozone. I shoved David behind a massive turbine and crouched, leveling the gun at the door. Shadows danced on the wall as the tactical team thundered past on the stairs, their heavy boots clanging upward. They expected us to run for the roof. Amateurs. You never go to the roof in a building you don't know. You get trapped. You go to the loading dock. We navigated the maintenance level, moving through the shadows like rats in the walls. I found a freight elevator at the far end. It was old, operated by a manual lever. I pulled the grate shut and engaged the motor. It groaned, a loud grinding protest that made me wince, but it started to descend. Hold on, David, I whispered, checking his pulse. It was erratic, thready. Just a little longer? He looked at me, his eyes clearing for a second. The man in the white suit, he said lucidly. He isn't the boss, detective. He's the janitor. The real ones, they don't live here. They live in the signal. The elevator jolted to a halt. We were at ground level. The doors opened onto a loading bay bathed in moonlight. Real Texas moonlight. I could have kissed the concrete. A delivery van was parked near the ramp, its back doors open. A guy in blue coveralls was loading crates marked with medical hazard symbols. I didn't hesitate. I walked up behind him and pressed the barrel of the sci-fi gun into the base of his skull. Don't turn around, I said. Keys, phone, walk away. He froze, then dropped a set of keys. Take it, man. Just don't. Don't hurt the cargo. The cargo is people, I snarled, shoving him toward the exit. He ran. I threw David into the passenger seat and jumped behind the wheel. The van smelled of stale coffee and cardboard. I floored it, tires screeching on the asphalt as we tore out of the compound. In the rear-view mirror, I saw the facility, It looked like a legitimate medical research park. Manicured lawns, glass facade. A perfect cover for a hellhole. We drove for 2 hours, taking back roads, doubling back, checking for tails. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, shaking exhaustion. I needed a safe place. Not a motel too many cameras. Not my house they'd be waiting. I thought of the one place nobody looked anymore. The old hunting cabin my dad had built in the 70s, deep in the scrubland near Mason. No electricity. No internet. Just 4 walls and a wood stove. We got there just as the sun was bleeding purple over the horizon. I helped David inside and laid him on the dusty cot. He was shivering, mumbling about snakes in the static. I lit a kerosene lantern and sat at the rough-hewn table. I emptied my pockets, the futuristic gun, the remote, the magnetic keys, and the items from the office, the reel-to-reel tape and my father's journal. I picked up the journal. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the pages. I skipped past the entry about the project and looked for the end, the last entry, dated 3 days before he died, March 12, 1974. It's not a weapon. I was wrong. We tried to make spies, but we made receivers. The children aren't just hearing things. They are being spoken to. Something is waiting on the other side of that frequency. Something old. Holloway calls it the source. I call it what it is, the devil. I'm shutting it down. I'm taking the tapes to the governor. God forgive me for what I've done to those kids. God forgive me for Mary. I slammed the book shut. The silence of the cabin felt heavy, oppressive. Outside, the crickets were chirping, but even that sounded wrong, rhythmic, pulsing, like the beat from the chamber. I looked at the gun on the table. It wasn't just a weapon. It was evidence. Proof. But proof of what? That the government was kidnapping kids to talk to demons via radio waves? Who would believe that? The media would laugh. The police would lock me up. Detective. David rasped from the cot. I went to him. He was pale, his skin waxy. I don't have much time, he whispered. The recalibration. It fried something. Inside. Don't talk like that, I said, grabbing a bottle of water. You're dehydrated. No. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak now. Listen. The tape. You have to play the tape. But not the beginning. The end. The part they didn't want us to hear. I don't have a player, David. The van, he coughed. It had a deck. An old one. Please. I ran out to the van. He was right. It was an old fleet vehicle, and the dashboard had a cassette player, but that wouldn't work for reel-to-reel. Then I remembered the cargo. The crates. I ripped one open. Inside, nestled in foam, was equipment. High-end military-grade audio gear, and a portable reel player. I hauled it into the cabin, hooked it up to a car battery I pulled from the van. I threaded the tape from Holloway's office. Session 1, Vance. I pressed play. Static. The doctor's voice. Mary screaming. I fast-forwarded. More screaming. The sound of the machine whining. Then silence. Keep going, David whispered from the cot. To the dead air? I let it run. 10 minutes of silence. Just the hiss of the tape. And then a sound. Faint at first, then clearer. A voice. But it wasn't Mary, and it wasn't the doctor. It was a voice that sounded like grinding stones, like the earth shifting. ... Vessel accepted. Boundary dissolved. We see you, Mark. I froze. The tape was from 1963. I was 10 years old in 1963. ... We see you, Mark. We see the sun. The carrier. Bring him to the circle. The door is open. The tape clicked off. I looked at David. He wasn't breathing. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. But he wasn't looking at the wooden beams. He was looking through them. And on his face, frozen in rigor mortis, was a smile. a terrified, ecstatic smile. I was alone. Alone with a dead man, a demon tape, and a gun that fired compressed air. And somewhere out there, in the dark, a man in the gray suit was hunting. But he wasn't the one I was afraid of anymore, because the voice on the tape, the voice from 1963, it knew my name. I buried David Vance under a mesquite tree as the sun came up. It wasn't a proper funeral, no priest, no flowers, just a shallow grave dug with a rusty spade and a few words mumbled into the dry morning air. You're free now, David. No more static. I marked the spot with a pile of limestone rocks, the only headstone he was likely to get. I felt a heaviness in my chest that wasn't just fatigue. It was the crushing weight of failure. I had dragged a traumatized old man out of his safe, quiet hell and led him straight into a slaughterhouse. But guilt is a luxury for the living, and right now, I had a target on my back the size of Texas. The voice on the tape, "We see you," Mark kept looping in my mind, a cold worm burrowing into my subconscious. If they had known about me since 1963, then my entire life, my career, my choices, were they mine? Or was I just another variable in an equation I didn't understand? I needed leverage. The journal mentioned the governor. In 1974, that would have been Briscoe. He was long dead. But political secrets are like nuclear waste. They have a half-life of forever. If my father was going to the governor, there had to be a record. Not in the official archives. Those would be sanitized, but in the shadow file, the personal correspondence that politicians keep as insurance policies against each other. I drove the stolen van to a truck stop in Fredericksburg, ditched it, and hitchhiked into Austin. I needed to disappear into the crowd. I bought a thrift store jacket, a baseball cap, and a pair of cheap reading glasses. I looked like every other retired tourist wandering around 6th Street. My destination wasn't the Capitol. It was a small, dusty antique bookstore on South Congress called The Paper Trail. The owner, a guy named Saul, was an old informant of mine. He specialized in rare books, maps, and things that fell off the back of government trucks. The bell chimed as I walked in. The smell of old paper and vanilla pipe tobacco hit me a scent from a simpler time. Saul was behind the counter, polishing a pair of brass spectacles. He didn't look up. "We're closed for inventory, friend." "I'm not looking for a book, Saul. I'm looking for a ghost." He froze, then slowly looked up. His eyes widened behind the thick lenses. "Mark, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. You look like you've been dragged through a knothole backward." I heard things. "There's a bolo out for you. Armed and dangerous. Suspected in kidnapping and homicide. They pinned David on me." I let out a dry laugh. "Of course they did. Saul, I need access. The 74 Briscoe files. The unauthorized ones." Saul paled. He walked to the door, flipped the sign to closed, and locked it. "You're talking about the deep state collection. Mark, people die for asking about those boxes. Why do you think I keep them in a vault that requires 2 keys and a retina scan? Because you're the only honest crook in Austin. Saul, look at this." I pulled the journal out of my jacket. I opened it to the page with the symbol. "Does this mean anything to you?" Saul took the book. He stared at the triangle with the eye. His hands started to tremble. "Where did you get this?" He whispered, "This is the sigil of the Ordo Aletheia, the Order of Truth. It's not a government agency, Mark. It single quotes S. Older. It's a cabal. Industrialists, scientists, mystics. They believe that human consciousness is a radio signal from a higher dimension, and they've been trying to tune it for a century. My father worked for them," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Your father," Saul looked at me with pity, "was a gatekeeper. They recruit from law enforcement to keep the perimeter secure. But this ... He tapped the journal. If he was going to the governor, he wasn't just blowing the whistle. He was offering a trade, the project for his life. Or yours. Mine. Mark, think. You were 10 years old in 1963, the prime age for their subjects. Did you ever have episodes as a kid? Missing time? Hearing voices? The question hit me like a physical blow. I flashed back to my childhood, Sundays when I'd wake up with nosebleeds. The way I could always tell when the phone was about to ring before it did. The way I just knew, where to find lost things. My mom called it Mark's magic. My dad just called it lucky. Oh my God, I whispered. I was a subject. But I wasn't in the facility. Control group, Saul said grimly. They needed a baseline. A child raised in a normal environment, monitored but not molested. To see if the gift would manifest naturally. He went behind the counter and pulled out a heavy iron key. The Briscoe files aren't here. I moved them. Too hot. They're in a locker at the Greyhound station. Locker 404. 404, I muttered. Same as the office number. They like their little jokes. It's not a joke, Mark. It's a frequency. 404 hertz is the dissonance tone. It creates confusion. Go. Take the key. And Mark, if you find what I think you'll find, burn it. Don't read it. Just burn it. I took the key and slipped out the back alley. The Greyhound station was only a few blocks away, but it felt like miles. Every siren made me flinch. Every person on a cell phone looked like an agent. I reached the station, a grim, fluorescent-lit purgatory of hopeless travelers. I found the lockers. 404 was bottom row, dented and scratched. I inserted the key. It turned with a stiff click. Inside was a single padded envelope. No dust. Someone had been here recently. Or maybe the air in there was just dead. I grabbed it and walked briskly to the nearest exit, heading for a diner across the street. I needed coffee, and I needed to sit down before my legs gave out. I slid into a booth at the back of Nighthawk's, ordered a black coffee, and tore open the envelope. It wasn't a file. It was a VHS tape and a letter. The letter was on Governor's stationery, dated March 14, 1974, 2 days after my father's last journal entry, 1 day before he died. Dear Detective Miller, I received your package. The contents are disturbing. If what you say is true, that we are inviting entities into our reality through the minds of children, then God help us all. I cannot officially sanction a raid on the facility. The order has tendrils in every branch of my administration. But I can offer you this, a contingency. The tape you sent me? I've made a copy. I'm burying the original in the cornerstone of the new State Archive building. If anything happens to you, or if the project is not dismantled, this copy goes to the press. They know this. It's your life insurance. But be warned, Miller. You can't kill an idea. You can only drive it underground. And if they have your son, if Mark is truly the carrier, then you have a choice to make. Save the world or save your boy? I stared at the letter. Save the world or save your boy? My father chose me. He didn't expose them. He made a deal. He kept the secret to keep me safe. And in return, they killed him anyway. Or did he kill himself? The accident. Maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe it was the price. And the VHS tape? It was labeled Subject 0-1953. I was born in 1953. I needed a VCR. Who the hell has a VCR in 2025? I looked around the diner. It was a retro-themed place. There was a TV in the corner, playing old sitcoms. And below it, dusty but plugged in, a VCR. I walked over to the waitress. "Honey," I said, flashing a $20 bill, "can I play a home movie? It's my granddaughter's birthday." She shrugged, popping her gum. "Knock yourself out. Just don't change the volume." I shoved the tape in. The screen flickered. Static. Then a black and white image appeared. A nursery. A crib. And standing over the crib, 2 men. One was Dr. Holloway, younger, darker hair. The other ... was my father. He's responding to the tone, Holloway said. The audio was grainy. Look at the EE. His delta waves are synchronizing. Is he in pain? My father asked. His voice was filled with fear. Pain is irrelevant. He is hearing the source. Look at his eyes, Miller. The camera zoomed in on the baby in the crib. Me. My eyes were open, and they were pitch black. No whites, just void. And the baby wasn't crying. It was laughing. A low, guttural laugh that didn't belong to an infant. He is the vessel, Holloway whispered. The others are just amplifiers. This one is the door. I hit eject. My hand was shaking so hard, I almost dropped the tape. The waitress was staring at me. The few patrons were looking. I had to go. I ran out of the diner, clutching the tape to my chest. I had the proof. I knew the truth. I wasn't just a detective. I was the bomb. And they had been waiting 60 years for the timer to run out. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of me. The back window rolled down. It wasn't the man in the gray suit. It was a woman. Elegant, silver hair, sharp eyes. She looked like a senator or a CEO. Get in, Mark, she said calmly. If you run, Graves will kill you. If you come with me, we can finish what your father started. Who are you? I backed away, hand on the futuristic gun in my pocket. I'm the one who sent you the DNA result, she said. I'm Dr. Aries, and I'm the new head of the order. I got in the car. Not because I trusted her. Trust was a currency I'd spent the last of on a dead man in a hunting cabin. But because the street was filling with shadows that moved against the wind, and the futuristic pistol in my pocket felt like a toy against the weight of what I'd just seen on that VCR tape. Dr. Aries didn't look like a mad scientist or a cult leader. She looked like old money. She wore a cream-colored suit that cost more than my pension, and the interior of the SUV smelled of expensive leather and sterile silence. As we merged onto the highway, heading north toward Dallas, she poured a glass of sparkling water from a crystal decanter built into the armrest. You look dehydrated, Mark, and terrified. Drink. It's just water. No frequencies, no additives. I ignored the glass. You said you're the head of the order, I said, my hand still gripping the gun. But you called me about the DNA. You started this. Why? Because Graves is a butcher, she said, sipping her water with a grace that was almost infuriating. He believes in brute force. He thinks he can drill a hole into the other side and drag the gods kicking and screaming into our reality. He's crude. My faction ... we believe in invitation. We believe that the door must be opened from the inside, by someone who holds the key. She turned to look at me, her eyes cool and analytical, the same way she'd looked at the computer screen in the lab. You, Mark, you are the key. You always were. Your father knew it. That's why he hid you in plain sight. He thought he was saving you from us. In reality, he was preserving you for this moment. I'm not a key, I snapped. I'm a retired cop with a bad knee and a warrant for his arrest. And if you think I'm going to help you open some Hellgate, you're crazier than Graves. Hell is just a word for a geography we haven't mapped yet, she replied dismissively. And you won't help us because we force you. You'll help us because you want to know. You want to know why you never got sick a day in your life. Why you always knew when a suspect was lying. Why you felt that hum in your bones when you stood over Mary Vance's grave. You've been hearing the source your whole life, Mark. You just learned to tune it out. We're going to teach you how to listen. The car ride was a blur of highway lights and silent tension. We arrived in Dallas at dusk, pulling into the underground garage of a glass needle that pierced the skyline, the Aletheia Tower. It was a corporate fortress. The elevator ride to the penthouse took a full minute, my ears popping as we ascended. When the doors opened, I wasn't stepping into a lair. I was stepping into a cathedral of commerce and occultism. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the sprawling city lights. But etched into the glass were faint, translucent lines of geometry, the same snake-like patterns I'd seen in the facility. In the center of the room stood a massive table made of black obsidian, and sitting around it were 12 people. Men and women, suits and uniforms. I recognized a senator, a tech mogul, a bishop. "Welcome home, Subject Zero," Maurice said, gesturing to the empty chair at the head of the table. I didn't sit. I walked to the window, looking down at the ants crawling on the streets below. "So this is it," I said, my reflection in the glass looking pale and ghostly. "The Illuminati, the deep state, whatever you call yourselves. We are the custodians," said the bishop, a man with a kindly face that didn't match the coldness of his aura. "We tend the garden, and sometimes we have to prune the weeds." "Mary Vance was a weed?" I asked, turning to face them. "David Vance? All those kids in the basement?" "Prototypes," said the tech mogul, tapping a tablet. "Necessary failures. Hardware limitations. The human brain isn't designed to handle the raw bandwidth of the source. It burns out. Mary ... Mary was close, but her vessel was too fragile. You, Mark, you were the first successful hybrid, engineered in utero, gestated in a field of resonant frequencies. You are the only one who can hold the signal without breaking." "And what happens when I hold the signal?" I asked, moving closer to the obsidian table. "Do I get a wish? Do I get world peace?" "Evolution," Maurice said, stepping up beside me. "Humanity has reached a dead end, Mark. We are consuming our planet, fighting over scraps, drowning in noise. The source offers a reset, a collective consciousness. No more lies, no more secrets, no more pain. Just ... unity. The hive mind. You are the router. Once you connect, everyone connects, instantaneously." "Borg," I muttered. "You want to turn the human race into a hive of bees. Is that so bad?" Maurice asked softly, "Look at your life, Mark. The loneliness, the divorce, the drinking, the nights you sat awake, wondering if any of it mattered. Imagine never feeling alone again. Imagine knowing that every thought, every feeling is shared and understood by billions. It's paradise." It was a seductive pitch. I could feel the pull of it, the promise of an end to the crushing isolation of being human. For a second, just a second, I wavered. But then I thought of David Vance. I thought of his fear. I thought of Mary screaming on that tape, "I want my mommy." That wasn't paradise. That was the erasure of the soul. "I have a counterproposal," I said, reaching into my pocket. Not for the gun that would be useless against 12 of the most powerful people in the world. I reached for the remote I'd stolen from Graves. "The frequency controller." "What is that?" The senator stood up, alarm on his face. "Graves called this a vertical hold adjuster," I said, my thumb hovering over the dial. "He said it helps you see the picture. You want to connect to the source? You want to hear the music? Let's turn up the volume." I didn't know what the dial did exactly. I just knew Graves had been terrified of me touching it. I spun the wheel all the way to the right, to a setting marked Danger, Unfiltered. Then I hit the red button. The room didn't explode. The sound didn't shatter the windows. Instead, a silence fell. A heavy, suffocating silence. The lights in the city below seemed to freeze. The air in the room turned into gelatin. Then the screaming started. It wasn't the people in the room. It was coming from the walls, from the floor, from the sky, a billion voices screaming in unison. It was the sound of every nightmare, every pain, every forgotten murder, every swallowed lie in human history, all hitting us at once. The bishop clawed at his eyes. The tech mogul fell to the floor, seizing, foam bubbling from his lips. Aris dropped her glass of water. It shattered, but the sound was lost in a psychic roar. She fell to her knees, hands over her ears, blood trickling from her nose. "Turn it off!" She shrieked, though I heard her voice in my mind, not my ears. "It's too much. It's not ready." "You wanted the truth." I yelled, though I couldn't hear myself. I felt the pressure building in my own head, a migraine that threatened to split my skull. But I held on. I was the vessel, right? I was built for this. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stand upright while the masters of the world writhed on the floor. I looked at the glass walls. The etched snakes were glowing. They were writhing, detaching themselves from the glass. The man in the wall was trying to come through. I saw him a towering shadow against the Dallas skyline, blotting out the stars. He was pressing his face against the glass of the penthouse, testing the barrier. "Mark." The voice was a sledgehammer. "Open the door." "No," I groaned, falling to one knee. I'm locking it." I aimed the futuristic pistol not at the people, but at the remote in my other hand. It was a risky shot. If the battery exploded, I'd lose a hand. But if I didn't destroy it, the door would stay open forever. I pulled the trigger. The remote disintegrated in a flash of blue light and plastic shrapnel. The shockwave threw me backward. I hit the obsidian table hard, ribs cracking. The screaming stopped instantly. The shadow outside the window dissolved into smoke. The lights in the city flickered back to normal. The room was silent again, save for the whimpering of the custodians. Most of them were unconscious. The bishop was dead eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Aris was curled in a fetal position, sobbing quietly. I dragged myself up. My hand was burned, bleeding. My chest felt like it was caved in. But my mind, my mind was quiet. For the first time in 60 years, the background hum was gone. I walked over to Aris. She looked up at me, her elegant facade shattered. She looked like a frightened child. What did you do?" She whispered. I hung up the phone. I rasped. "And now, I'm going to make sure nobody ever picks it up again. I didn't kill them. Death was too easy. Instead, I took the tech mogul's tablet. It was unlocked. I found the server controls. The cloud where they stored their blackmail, their data, their research. Project Aletheia. Main database. I hit delete all. Then I initiated the format sequence. "You're destroying history," Aris wept. "You're destroying the future." "I'm giving us a chance to be human," I said. "Messy, lonely, quiet humans." I limped to the elevator. I had to get out before security rebooted. I had to disappear. Really disappear this time. But as the elevator doors closed, I saw something on the obsidian table. A reflection. It wasn't me. It was the boy from the VCR tape, the baby with the black eyes. He was sitting at the head of the table, smiling. I blinked, and he was gone. Just my own tired, battered face looking back at me from the polished black stone. I was free. Or so I thought. Disappearing is harder than it looks in the movies. You can burn your ID, ditch your phone, and pay cash for a rusted-out pickup truck. But you can't burn your face, and you certainly can't burn your memories. I spent the first 6 months moving, always moving. Texas to New Mexico, up through the spine of the Rockies, drifting like smoke. I slept in rest stops with one eye open, waiting for the black SUVs, for the high-pitched whine of a sonic weapon, for the sudden silence that precedes the arrival of the gray suits. But nothing came. The silence was just silence. The radio played classic rock, not demonic whispers. The news was filled with the usual political bickering. but no mention of a mass casualty event in a Dallas penthouse. Just a brief obituary for a prominent bishop who died of a sudden stroke and a tech CEO stepping down for health reasons. They had scrubbed it, cleaned the mess. The order was wounded, maybe, but the beast was still breathing. I eventually ran out of road in Oregon. I found a shack on the coast, near a town called Depo Bay Place, where the fog is thick enough to hide a man, and the ocean is loud enough to drown out his thoughts. I got a job under the table as a night watchman at a lumber yard. Cash in hand, no questions asked. It was a quiet life, a lonely life, exactly what I had fought for. But quiet is a relative term when you've had a direct line to the cosmic hive mind. I started having dreams. Not nightmares, exactly. Just glimpses. I'd be walking down a street in my sleep, and I'd see through other people's eyes. I'd feel the cold of a homeless man in Chicago. I'd taste the champagne of a debutante in Paris. I'd feel the terror of a soldier in a trench. It was faint, like hearing a radio station from the next town over, but it was there. The connection wasn't gone. I had just turned the volume down. One rainy Tuesday in November, a year after Dallas, I walked into Sal's Chowder House for my usual breakfast black coffee and dry toast. The place was empty, except for a trucker at the counter and a young woman in the back booth. I sat near the window, watching the gray waves hammer the rocks. The waitress, a kind soul named Betty, who knew not to ask about my past, poured my coffee. "You got a letter, hun," she said, sliding a white envelope across the formica. I froze. "A letter? Here?" "Yeah, some guy dropped it off this morning. Said you'd be in." My hand went instinctively to the waistband of my jeans, where I kept a snub-nosed .38, a relic compared to the energy weapon I'd left in Dallas, but comforting. "What guy?" "Just a guy. Suit. Looked like a lawyer. Tipped $5. I stared at the envelope. It was blank. No name, no address. I tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken yesterday. I was walking on the beach, head down, hands in pockets. But in the background, standing near the tree line, was a figure. A little girl. She was blurry, but the red ribbon in her hair was unmistakable. Mary Vance. I flipped the photo over. Written in elegant, cursive script. The signal doesn't stop just because you unplug the receiver, Mark. It just finds a new way in. Iris. She was alive. And she knew where I was. I didn't finish my coffee. I walked out into the rain, the photo burning a hole in my pocket. I went straight to my truck, but I didn't start it. I sat there, watching the wipers smear the water across the glass. They weren't coming to kill me. If they wanted me dead, I'd be dead. This was an invitation. Again, I drove back to my shack. It had been tossed. Not destroyed, just searched. My few clothes were scattered. The loose floorboard where I hid my cash was pried up, the money gone. But on the small table in the center of the room, they had left something. A laptop, open, powered on. On the screen was a video feed. Live. It showed a room I recognized, the spherical white room from the facility. But it wasn't empty. In the center chair, the one I had escaped from, sat a child. A boy. Maybe 10 years old. He was strapped in. And he was screaming. But no sound came out of the laptop speakers. Just the image of his mouth opening and closing in silent agony. A chat window popped up on the side of the screen. User_A. We rebuilt it. Better. Stronger. User_A. This is subject 14. He's not as resilient as you were, Mark. He's failing. The mortality rate is ... disappointing. User_A. We need the baseline. We need the carrier. Come back, Mark, or we burn through them all. One by one. I typed, my fingers trembling on the keys. Let him go. User_A. Come to the coordinates. Alone, you have 24 hours. Or subject 14 becomes a static burst. A set of GPS coordinates appeared. I punched them into my phone. It wasn't Texas. It was Washington State, the Olympic Peninsula, a secluded area deep in the rainforest. I smashed the laptop. I put a boot through the screen, then took it outside and threw the pieces into the ocean. But the image of the screening boy stayed with me. It was the same trap, the same leverage. Save the world or save the boy. My father had chosen the boy, me, and the world had suffered for it. Now I had to make the choice again. But this time, I wasn't a scared kid, and I wasn't a lone detective with a badge. I was a man who had touched the void and survived. I went to the back of my shack. Under a pile of firewood, wrapped in oilcloth, was the one thing I hadn't thrown away. The journal, my father's journal. I had read it 100 times, but I had missed something. I knew I had. There had to be a weakness, a flaw in the design. I sat under the weak light of a kerosene lamp and turned the pages. I skipped the technical jargon, the guilt-ridden confessions. I looked for the origin. Where did Holloway get the idea? Where did the frequency come from? Page 88, a field note. October 1959. The anomalies are not just auditory. They are geographical. The signal is strongest near deposits of quartz and magnetite. The Earth itself is the antenna. If we can amplify the telluric currents, quartz, magnetite. The facility in Texas was built on limestone neutral ground. That's why they needed the massive generators, the artificial power. But the coordinates in Washington. The Olympic Peninsula. It's volcanic, basalt, iron. They weren't just building a lab. They were plugging directly into the planet's nervous system. That's why the signal was stronger. That's why they didn't need me there to open the door. They were using the Earth to pry it open. But if the Earth was the amplifier, then it could also be the ground. I needed explosives. A lot of them. I didn't have a contact for C4, but I worked at a lumber yard. We used dynamite for clearing stumps and breaking rock. It was tracked, inventory controlled, locked up tight. But I was the night watchman. I had the keys. That night, I robbed my own employer. I took 2 crates of dynamite, blasting caps, and a spool of detonation wire. I loaded it into my truck. It was a suicide mission. I knew that. Walking into a fortified base with a truckload of TNT wasn't exactly subtle. But subtlety hadn't worked. Deletion hadn't worked. Running hadn't worked. It was time to make some noise. I drove north, crossing the Columbia River into Washington. The rain turned to snow as I climbed into the mountains. The trees grew taller, darker. The air felt heavy, charged with static. My nose started to bleed. Just a trickle at first, then a steady stream. The closer I got to the coordinates, the louder the hum became in my head. It wasn't voices this time. It was a tone. A pure, discordant note that vibrated in my teeth. 404 hertz. I reached the turnoff around midnight. An old logging road, unmarked. A gate blocked the way, heavy steel, cameras, heapad. I didn't stop. I rammed the gate with the truck. The grill crumpled, the airbag deployed, punching me in the face, but the gate gave way. I was in. The road wound up the mountain, slick with mud and ice. I could see lights through the trees ahead, floodlights cutting through the mist. The new facility. It looked like a bunker, half buried in the side of the mountain. I parked the truck about half a mile out, hidden in a grove of firs. I rigged the dynamite. I didn't have a fancy timer. I had a wind-up alarm clock and a battery, old school. I set it for 20 minutes. I stuffed a backpack with as many sticks as I could carry, wired a few bundles together for a manual throw, and stepped out into the cold. The hum was deafening now. I could barely hear my own footsteps. I moved through the woods, flanking the entrance. There were guards, paramilitary types with thermal scopes. But the static, the static, was messing with their gear. I could see them tapping their headsets, looking confused. The signal was too strong here. It was blinding their tech. I used that blind spot. I crawled through a drainage culvert, icy water soaking my jeans, and popped up inside the perimeter fence. The bunker entrance was a massive concrete maw. And standing in front of it, waiting, was Dr. Eris. She wasn't wearing a suit this time. She was wearing a white lab coat, stained with mud. She looked wild, ecstatic. She was staring right at the spot where I was hiding. "I knew you'd come," she shouted, her voice cutting through the wind. "You can feel it, can't you, Mark? The crescendo. We're about to break through." I stood up, the detonator in my hand. "Let the boy go, Eris." She laughed. "The boy? The boy is gone, Mark. He's already crossed over. He's the bridge now. Look." She pointed to the sky. The clouds above the mountain were swirling, forming a funnel. Lightning purple, silent lightning arced between the peaks. The ground shook. "It's too late for bombs, Detective," she screamed. "Physics doesn't apply here anymore." She was right. I could feel the dynamite in my pack. It wasn't heavy anymore. It felt weightless. The laws of reality were thinning. I had one chance. I didn't run toward her. I didn't run toward the boy. I ran toward the generator array massive cooling towers humming on the side of the bunker. If I couldn't stop the signal, I had to cut the power. "Stop him!" Eris shrieked. Bullets zipped past me. One grazed my arm, a hot sting. I didn't slow down. I reached the first tower, slapped a bundle of dynamite onto the intake valve, and lit the fuse. 5 seconds. I dove behind a concrete barrier. Boom! The explosion rocked the mountain. Metal shrapnel rained down. The hum faltered. The purple lightning flickered. But it wasn't enough. The other towers were still running, and the guards were closing in. I scrambled up, reaching for another bundle, but a hand grabbed my ankle. I looked down. It wasn't a guard. It was David Vance, or ... something that looked like him, pale, translucent, glowing with that same purple light. "Don't," the ghost David whispered. "Don't break the circle, Mark. We're almost home." I kicked him away. My boot passed right through his chest. It was a projection, a hallucination. The source was defending itself. I threw the second bundle. There is no white light, no tunnel, no choir of angels. When you die, or when you step sideways out of reality, there is only the static. It's the color of a TV tuned to a dead channel, and it tastes like copper pennies. I was floating in it, adrift, no body, no pain. Just a consciousness suspended in a soup of infinite noise. I tried to scream, but I had no mouth. I tried to reach out, but I had no hands. I was just a thought, a memory of a man named Mark Miller, slowly dissolving into the background radiation of the universe. And then I saw them, not with eyes, but with something else. The others, millions of them. Sparks of light trapped in the gray fog. Some were dim, fading. Others were bright, terrified. "I want my mommy." The thought wasn't mine. It was Mary's. She was here. They were all here. The project hadn't just killed them. It had caught them, like fireflies in a jar. "Mark." The voice cut through the static like a knife. It wasn't the booming voice of the source. It was small, human. I focused my will, shaping myself into a form, a semblance of the man I used to be. The gray mist parted. Standing there, on a floor made of rippling obsidian, was the boy. The one from the VCR tape, Subject 0 me. But not me. He was the part of me I had left behind in 1953, the part that had stared into the abyss and hadn't blinked. "You broke the door," the boy said. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked sad. But you didn't close it. I blew up the mountain, I said, my voice sounding like wind in a canyon. I destroyed the amplifiers. Aris is dead. The order is buried. You destroyed the hardware, the boy corrected, stepping closer. His eyes were still black voids, but they didn't look evil. They looked infinite. But the software? The software is us, Mark. You and me. We are the frequency. As long as we exist, the door is open. That's why they couldn't kill you. That's why you survived the car crashes, the shootouts, the loneliness. You are the anchor. I looked around at the swirling lights, the souls of the children. So what now? We stay here forever? A purgatory for broken toys? No, the boy said. We have a choice. The one Dad couldn't make. The one the governor was too scared to make. He held out a hand. It was small, pale, unblemished. We can let go. Let go. The signal requires a receiver to manifest, he explained. If the receiver turns itself off, the signal has nowhere to go. It dissipates. The door closes. And they ... He gestured to the swirling lights. ... They go free. To wherever they were supposed to go before we trapped them. And what happens to us? The boy shrugged. It was such a human gesture it broke my heart. I don't know. Maybe silence. Maybe nothing. Maybe peace. I looked at him. I looked at the life I had lived 60 years of fighting, running, drinking, regretting. I thought about Mary Vance. I thought about David. I thought about the old man in the hunting cabin, digging a grave at dawn. I was tired. God, I was so tired. Okay, I said. I took his hand. The contact was electric. A shock wave of pure memory blasted through me. I saw everything at once, my first steps. The smell of my father's cologne. The bluebonnets in the field where they found Mary. The rain in Oregon. The taste of black coffee. The fear, the love. The hate. It all flared up, brighter than a sun. And then ... beep. Beep, beep. The sound was rhythmic. Annoying. Mechanical. I opened my eyes. White tiles, fluorescent lights. A smell of antiseptic and floor wax. I wasn't in the void. I was in a bed. A hospital bed. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, encased in lid. My arm was in a cast. My chest was bandaged. A tube was running into my nose. He's awake, a voice said. A nurse. She sounded bored. Dr. Evans. Room 302. A doctor walked in, a young guy with tired eyes and a clipboard. He shined a light in my eyes. Mr. Miller, can you hear me? I tried to speak. My throat was dry as sandpaper. Water, I croaked. He nodded to the nurse, who held a cup with a straw to my lips. I drank. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. Where ... I coughed. Where am I? Seattle Grace, the doctor said. You've been in a coma for 3 weeks. You were found half frozen on the side of Mount Olympus. Looks like you got caught in a landslide. You're lucky to be alive. A few broken ribs, a shattered arm, hypothermia. But you're tough. A landslide, not an explosion. Not a battle with a cult. A landslide. The facility, I whispered. The bunker. The doctor frowned. There's no bunker up there, Mr. Miller. It's a national park. Just trees and rocks. Rangers said you were probably hiking off trail and triggered a slide. They found your truck a few miles down. You had some interesting equipment in there. Blasting caps? I closed my eyes. I work. In a lumber yard. Right? The doctor said, skeptical. Well, the police will want to talk to you about that when you're stronger. For now, rest. He turned to leave. Doctor? I asked. He stopped. Yeah? Is it ... quiet? He looked confused. The hospital? Yeah, it's usually pretty quiet on this floor. No, I said. The world. Is it quiet? He smiled, thinking I was delirious. Sure, Mr. Miller, it's quiet. He left. I lay there, listening. I listened for the hum, for the static, for the voices. Nothing, just the beep of the monitor, the whir of the AC, the distant sound of traffic. Silence. I laughed. It hurt my ribs, but I laughed. I had done it. Or maybe I hadn't. Maybe I had just dreamed the whole thing while freezing to death on a mountain. Maybe Aris, the order, the source, maybe it was all just the firing of dying synapses in a broken brain. It didn't matter. The silence was real. I looked at the bedside table. My personal effects were in a clear plastic bag. My wallet, my keys, and I froze. Inside the bag, pressed against the plastic, was a small wooden object, a hand-carved horse. David Vance's horse, the one that was buried with Mary. I stared at it. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the AC. If there was no bunker, if there was no David ... where did the horse come from? I reached for the bag with my good hand. I shook it. The horse tumbled around, and behind it a piece of paper fluttered. A small, yellowed business card. Dr. T.H. Halloway. Clinical Research. I picked up the card. On the back, in fresh blue ink, someone had written a message. The door is closed, Mark, but we left a window open. Just in case. I looked at the window of my hospital room. It was night. The reflection in the glass stared back at me. An old man, battered, broken. But as I watched, my reflection winked. I winked back. Game over, I whispered, and then I went to sleep. A dreamless, silent sleep